Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò denies that he has a double. What does this mean? Is Archbishop Viganò bilocating? There are two of them? Is there a masked man, like a Mission Impossible movie? No, here's what's happening. Professor Roberto de Mattei, who you've heard me speak well of over the last couple of years, has recently come out and said, I've noticed in Viganò a shift in the way he speaks, in his presentations. And Roberto de Mattei, Professor Roberto de Mattei, and I'll talk about who he is in just a moment, he says, I think there's a ghostwriter, or there's another mind, there's another person who is speaking for Archbishop Viganò, because there seems to be two minds, a double. And Roberto de Mattei is the one who used those words. Archbishop Viganò came out today with a statement saying absolutely not. There is no double. There is no separate mind that's issuing my statements. They are my words. I stand behind them. These are my thoughts. So that's what we're going to look at today, is this allegation. And then I'm also going to just briefly, today's show will be a little bit shorter, I'm going to briefly go through the history of the last 3 years, beginning in 2018, Summer of Shame, which in a large part has to do with Archbishop Viganò blowing the whistle, 2019, 2020, and 2021. And I think I'm going to, since I believe I've read everything that Viganò's ever written, I'm going to give you my account on why I think the statements of Archbishop Viganò are legit and are in line with his thinking. So with that, let's begin with the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer, and we'll jump into it. Oremus. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater noster, qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis odie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, first off, who is Roberto de Mattei? Now, the timing of this is really interesting because the most recent book that I read it last week, was written by Roberto de Mattei. So it's kind of shocking to wake up this week on Monday morning and see Roberto de Mattei making an accusation against Archbishop Viganò. The book I just read this past week was the latest book. I think it's the newest book by Roberto de Mattei, and it is his new biography on St. Pius V. You can see mine's kind of water-worn because I was in my swimsuit often reading this book, and it's a great book. I really did enjoy it, and you've probably also heard me several times on this podcast talk about Roberto de Mattei's book, The Second Vatican Council, The Unwritten Story. When people say, hey, what's a good book on the Second Vatican Council, this is the book that I usually recommend, and I used it in part in my research preparing the book Infiltration that I wrote in 2019. Okay, so Roberto de Mattei is a traditional Catholic. He has spoken against evolution. He's been a defender of the traditional Latin Mass and is kind of well known in traditional circles. So to see him sort of saying something negative against Archbishop Viganò is interesting in the least. Now, something going on here, and I think once I explain this, you'll kind of understand more of what kind of a rift is happening here. Roberto de Mattei, although he's very much has a careful critique of the Second Vatican Council, promotes the traditional Latin Mass and other such movements, he has been recently, within the last 4-5 months, very vocal and open about the global pandemic, vaccines, etc. And he has written a booklet called On the Moral Laicity of the Vaccine. And this has led many traditionalists to say, now, whoa, what's going on with Professor Roberto de Mattei? Why is he coming in defense of taking the vaccine? And this is now, as you know, if you read Archbishop Viganò, he's very anti vaccine. So these two men have taken opposite positions when it comes to the efficacy, the safety, and the moral permission of receiving COVID vaccines. So that's a little bit of a battleground there, and we know that these two men are in opposite camps when it comes to that. Now, I'd like to read for you, it's very short, the response of Archbishop Viganò. I received this today or last night. Archbishop Viganò says, the article, The Viganò Case, the Archbishop and His Double, which appeared yesterday in Corrispondenza Romana in both Italian and English, signed by Professor Roberto de Mattei, has been pointed out to me. I am unable not to express my amazement at the statements that an illustrious Catholic intellectual, hailed as a champion of tradition, and who has not spared the hierarchy criticism that is at times severe but always carefully considered and just, felt that he had to make in my regard. In reality, it would have been enough to consult me verbally or by letter in order to dispel his suspicions and feel reassured that all my writings, declarations, and interviews which I have given are the full fruit of maturation and convictions of which I proudly claim full paternity. So in this opening sentence, he's saying, look, Roberto de Mattei wrote or signed an article called The Archbishop and His Double about Viganò. He says, hey, all he had to do was write me a letter or call me to verify this, and I would have clarified it. But no, it went out in the public, and so Viganò is now making this public statement. And again, it's very short, so I'll just read the next section here and it'll be over. He says, Archbishop Viganò, the idea that I have a double must be the fruit of some advisor to whom Professor de Mattei has improvidently lent his faith, without realizing that by doing so he has exposed himself to the public refutation of completely unfounded allegations, which also sound, if I may be allowed to say so, not very charitable in my regard. I am therefore taking the opportunity afforded by this article to deny his impotent and fanciful theses, reassuring those who have the goodness to read me and listen to me that there is no ghostwriter, and that the grace of God I still have by the grace of God, I still have full possession of my faculties. I am not manipulated by anyone, and I am absolutely determined to continue my apostolic mission for the salvation of souls. So there you have it. He says his writings, his declarations, and his interviews, and he said, I like the language, I proudly claim full paternity. If you take a paternity test, he's the dad. And then he closes with this statement, Archbishop Viganò, at other times, de Mattei would have been proud to be at my side in the common battle for the Catholic truth, for the defense of the immutable magisterium and of the venerable traditional liturgy against the assaults of the modernists. He would have probably also been at my side in denouncing the pandemic fraud and the intrinsic immorality of experimental vaccines produced with fetal material derived from abortions. His recent interventions, published with his name or under a pseudonym, have demonstrated, not without heartfelt sorrow, that if there is a double, it must be sought in the recent writings of the professor, writings that seem to be composed by a dull regime official who is obedient to the mainstream narrative, and not by the sharp mind of genuine faith of the de Mattei I once knew. Carlo Maria Viganò. So there's actually a little bit of a twist here. Archbishop Viganò says if there's anyone who has a double, he says it's de Mattei, because de Mattei was illustrious, he was such a great historian, and now he says that his writings, particularly, I guess, with regard to the vaccines, I assume that's what I don't assume he's talking about the new book on Pius V. I assume he's talking about the vaccines, is composed by a, quote, dull regime official who is obedient to the mainstream narrative. So there's definitely some friction here. Now, as a person, I would call myself I guess you could say I'm a student or a scholar of Viganò. I've read everything he's written, as far as I know. I've studied his history. I've spoken to him many times. I feel like I know who he is, and I've done a lot of commentary on it, so I feel qualified in talking about it. I wanted to just go into the recent history of Archbishop Viganò, and I think when you understand what's happened in the last 3.5 years, the narrative makes sense. And I think what Professor Roberto de Mattei is saying is, I think in a way, the history of the last 3.5 years gives an account for what Roberto de Mattei is noticing. Now, like I said, I've had respect for Roberto de Mattei. I met him in person in Rome at the Angelicum, and I had read his books and his research, and it was an honor to meet him. And I was very excited when I met him. It was the book Infiltration. My book Infiltration had only been out a few months. And when I met him, he congratulated me. He'd already read Infiltration, liked it, and said some kind words. So I was excited to hear that. I thought that was great. So if you go into the recent history, everything explodes in July, August of 2018. This is the summer of shame. This is when we learn that the rumors about Cardinal McCarrick being a pedophile, being a homosexual, being an embezzler, using his power as a priest, a bishop, an archbishop, and a cardinal, he had used it and abused it to prey on other people. We also found out around this time, thanks to Archbishop Viganò, that he was involved in negotiations with the Catholic Church in China. All of this broke out July, August, started in New York. I think maybe, if I remember correctly, the first big article was in the New York Times. And it had to do with some of the interventions made by Cardinal Dolan. But then the fireworks, the nuclear explosion that rippled throughout the Catholic Church and beyond happened. The date of the letter was August 25th, 2018. That was the first Viganos statement. It was 11 pages long. I remember when it came out. I remember being blown away. It's also interesting that before this statement came out, at the end of August 2018, I remember watching a interview. Now, we have the interview. Dan, who runs the highlights, he captured the interview. There's an interview with Bishop Robert Barron about the scandals and McCarrick and all this stuff. And Bishop Barron says, well, I think we need to go and talk to Viganò because he was the apostolic nuncio from the Vatican in D.C., and he would know more of the details on what's really going on in the Catholic Church in America with regard to McCarrick. Now, as far as I know, Bishop Robert Barron has never said anything like that again about Viganò, because Viganò, shortly thereafter or around that time, comes out with the 11-page testimony in which he names names, he names dates, he gives inside conversations and discussions and meetings with him and Pope Francis, Benedict XVI, Cardinal Wuerl, Cardinal McCarrick. I mean, it is just so explosive. It's a historical document in the history of the Catholic Church. Certainly in the history of the Catholic Church in the United States of America, the August 25th, 2018, 11-page testimony of Viganò was enormous. So that rolled into November 2018. The bishops did nothing. You'll remember, they didn't move forward for any investigation. 2019 happened, and Archbishop Viganò continued to pen these epistles. And the laity, remember, this is all pre-COVID, people. This is all pre-COVID. The laity were responding so well. The laity knew there were problems with the bishops, knew there were problems with the USCCB, knew there were problems with abuse. Here was the first time that Catholic lay people saw with their eyes what was happening in the corridors of Vatican City, what was going on in the Apostolic Palace. And of course, all Catholic lay people have been constantly wondering, why did Benedict XVI resign? What happened? What were the motives? What were the conditions? What was going on? And here we start to see beyond the curtain. That's really the excitement of 2018 and 2019. You know that I've been making podcasts and videos and all that since 2010, 2013. People started, I think, watching this channel and listening to the podcast more and more because the commentary was on these topics. And these topics had in a way been asleep routine. And the Summer of Shame and Viganò's letter ripped the Band-Aid off and blood flowed everywhere. Finally, people saw, oh man, the Catholic Church from the top down has some serious problems. And Pope Benedict XVI resigning just because he was feeling old and unhealthy, there's a lot more going on here. I mean, we're talking about abuse amongst the highest cleric in America, Cardinal McCarrick, Cardinal Archbishop of D.C., Kingmaker, Bishop Maker, and who's boasted and bragged about his influence, I would say demonic influence, in the 2013 conclave that elected Pope Francis. So the reason I'm saying all this is we have to kind of remember back before COVID, remember back to when all these things exploded. That was summer 2018, fall 2018, and then moving into 2019. And every Catholic, okay, maybe 99%, were Viganò fans. Everybody loved Archbishop Viganò. You know, it was all, we love Viganò, V is for Viganò, V is for victory, Pope Viganò. There was this huge relief. And I think for people who aren't Americans, I know a big audience, about 40% of my audience is non-American. So just to explain it to non-American Catholics, we in America don't really have a bishop or cardinal who is our man. I mean, some, in the neocon world really like Bishop Barron, but for most, I mean, there's not like, this is our bishop. And to see the former ambassador to America from the Vatican, the papal nuncio Viganò, speaking so clearly, speaking about heaven, hell, damnation, original sin, venial sin, mortal sin, liturgy, all these things, for the American Catholic psyche was like, we have our bishop. He may not be a diocesan bishop, but he is our nuncio. He was our nuncio, and we look to him as children looking for a father. We feel like we're abandoned. We feel like orphans. And at last, we have Archbishop Viganò. Everyone was a huge fan of Viganò. However, when we moved into 2020 and we started having the COVID crisis, and we also, let's remember, moved into an election year. And in 2020, we started to observe many Catholics, including myself, including Archbishop Viganò, speaking about COVID, health, lockdown, masks. Vaccines weren't really on the radar towards the fall. And the election. The election was a really big deal. I think there has been so much confusion and embarrassment about the election that people have just sort of swept it aside, and we'll talk about it and think about it maybe in a couple years, because there's so much confusion, sadness, hurt, judgment, etc. And Archbishop Viganò started talking about those two topics, and that ticked off a lot of people. That really ticked off a lot of people because Catholics, you've got, and I know we're not supposed to use the labels, but just for freehand, make this go faster in the video. You've got your liberal Catholics, James Martin, who want blessings on same-sex unions. They want no penalties or crimes for anyone who receives has an abortion. Doctors, politicians, everything is just sort of mercy. The Eucharist is bread for sinners, no questions asked, lots of hugs, and lots of accompaniment. Then you've got to catch your middle group who are conservative, and maybe they wouldn't go that far, and they kind of like John Paul II, and they'll buy whatever Word on Fire is putting out this month, and they watch EWTN, and that group tends to be a little bit, as a demographic, a little bit older. And then as you move more to the right, you have sort of semi-trad or post-trad, and then trads who are really excited in liturgy, particularly traditional Latin Mass. If not that, they like, well, I like Ad Orientem, and I want to maybe receive in my tongue, and what about communion veils, and what about the Anglican use, and all these things. The Trump situation, the presidential election, and the COVID, in a way, not in a way, it did. It really fractured and broke apart all of us on that right side. We all know that from friendships to collaborations to all those things, fractured, broken, because people had different stances on what they would say in public or what they wouldn't say, or different degrees on should we be going to Mass, should we be staying home, should we be going to Masses out in the barns, in the fields, should we go, should we be wearing masks at all? And then also, should we sit out this election because both candidates are really not Catholic, even though Biden says he is? Or should we get active in the campaign and try to promote Trump? And then we all know what happened after that. So I think the fact that Professor Roberto de Mattei is living in Italy, and that Archbishop Viganò, although he's Italian, he deeply understands the American heart, the American mind, American Catholicism, and he speaks to that constantly. I can see how people watching Archbishop Viganò from the outside would say, it seemed that in the middle of 2020, Archbishop Viganò became another person. He became a double. There was Archbishop Viganò, the papal nuncio, the insider in DC and Rome, who's an ecclesiastical reformer, and now there's Archbishop Viganò, the double, and he's a commentator on American politics, President Trump, the COVID pandemic, vaccines, masks, and then also, I didn't mention this, in 2020, we start seeing Archbishop Viganò having references to liturgy and talking more about the traditional Latin Mass. That's actually continued and grown in 2021 as I've followed the man and studied the man. So I can see someone from the outside looking and saying, yeah, Viganò turned into a second person. And I've heard American people, and I'm not going to name names, you might know who they are, who have said something similar, that the Archbishop Viganò that we were all excited about, 99% of us were like, Viganò, Viganò, Viganò. In 2020, the sails lost some of that wind. And that's the criticism. Now, if you're one of the people who believe that everyone should get injections and everyone should follow the CDC and the WHO and whatever Biden says and whatever Fauci said, if you're one of those people, you're not going to like Viganò, because Viganò's a rebel when it comes to that. So that's my account. That's my commentary on this rift, this feud, and that's my commentary on why I think Roberto de Mattei is saying the double Viganò, the second Viganò, when in fact it's the same man. Same man, same convictions, but we had in 2020 perhaps one of the most monumental shifts in American history, global history, 2020. A lot of people sat at home. A lot of Catholic thought leaders, intellectuals. Think about all the cardinals, who have a media platform, all the bishops and all the priests who have online platforms, who write books, send out DVDs, send out CDs, are on EWTN. And think about all the lay Catholic thought leaders, intellectuals, professors, the people who had shows on EWTN, etc. For the most part, those people in 2020 sat at home and said nothing because it's scary. We're talking about presidential election that ended in arrests and controversy and accusations of fraud. And then we're talking about a pandemic that has, in certain situations, criteria for you to get arrested or lose your job. And then if you were in the Catholic world, to be critical of Pope Francis, to be critical of the Vatican, to be critical of the USCCB could handicap and even cancel your Catholic university, your Catholic apostolate, your Catholic YouTube channel, your Catholic book deal, whatever it is. And I think one of the reasons why I like Viganò is he's kind of a cowboy, kind of Texan, and he doesn't, so many bishops will have committees and meetings and how do we respond and Archbishop Viganò will put out a statement within hours responding. And I guess that's a little bit more my personality type. Maybe it's not good. I don't know, but that's me. So I think that's what's going on. I hope this video was helpful. If you like it, please give it the thumbs up, a like button, and please share on Facebook and Twitter. And if you're new, please subscribe. I do live videos during the week, usually 3, sometimes 5 a week. So if you want to be notified when I go live and be part of our live feed, hit the subscribe and there's a little bell, hit the dingy bell and you'll be notified. You can do it in the right-hand corner if you like. You'll be notified every time I go live. All right. Also remember, pray the rosary every single day. It doesn't really matter what your opinion is on some of these things. Some of the opinions do matter because they're matters of faith and of morality. But we all can rally together and ask Our Lady, our Mother, our Queen, to correct our hearts and our mind. Easiest, best way, shortest way to do that is pray the rosary every blessed day. At least a third, she said in 1917 at Our Lady of Fatima. Pray the rosary every day or you're not on the team. Pray that rosary. Read the Bible every day. I'll be giving away this beautiful family heirloom Bible, Douay Rheims, to one of you who is a Patreon or a New St. Thomas Institute member. If you want to be involved in that and get all sorts of cool merchandise or signed books, you can go to patreon.com/DrTaylor Marshall. It's right here on the screen. Patreon.com/DrTaylor Marshall. And that drawing for this Bible will be on the Feast of St. Peter and Paul, June 29th. All right, we're going to close up and we'll pray the Ave Maria for our church. Oremus. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum. Benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et hora mortis nostrae. Amen. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, pray for us. All right, friends, thanks for watching. And remember, our Lord Jesus Christ says you're the light of the world and the salt of the earth. So go out there and be salty. God bless, Godspeed. And tomorrow, in anticipation of the Feast of John the Baptist, I'll have an educational video on the birth of John the Baptist. Did John the Baptist have original sin when he was born, or was he justified and regenerated before he was born? I have the answer for you tomorrow. Subscribe, tune in. Till then, God bless.